Seeking attention instead of respect is the first and most damaging weakness of the mind. When validation becomes the currency of self-worth, inner stability collapses. A woman who depends on attention no longer acts from principle but from reaction. Her words change depending on who is watching. Her values bend to fit the room she is in. This is not freedom, this is dependence. Attention is cheap and noisy. It comes easily and leaves suddenly. Respect, however, is earned slowly through consistency, discipline, and self-control. A mind trained to chase attention will sacrifice dignity for applause and peace for approval. When attention becomes the goal, silence feels like rejection. Solitude feels like punishment. This creates fear, fear of being unseen, fear of being forgotten, fear of being ordinary. That fear drives behavior. It pushes a person to overshare, to exaggerate, to provoke reactions just to feel alive. Instead of building inner strength, energy is wasted trying to control how others feel. This makes the mind fragile. Praise becomes addictive. Criticism becomes unbearable. One kind word can inflate the ego, and one harsh comment destroy the entire day. Respect does not work this way. Respect is quiet. It does not beg. It does not announce itself. It exists even when no one is watching. A woman who understands respect does not need to prove her worth every moment. She moves with restraint. She speaks with intention. She does not rush to explain herself because her actions already speak. She knows that chasing attention places her below the very people she wants approval from. Because the one who seeks is always in a weaker position than the one who chooses. Attention seeking also destroys boundaries. When approval is needed, boundaries are traded away. Values become flexible. Standards are lowered. The need to be liked becomes stronger than the need to be right. Over time, this creates internal conflict. The mind knows something is wrong, but the habit continues. This gap between knowing and acting is where self-respect erodes. Without self-respect, respect from others becomes impossible. There is also a deeper danger. A woman who lives for attention becomes predictable. Predictability invites manipulation. When others know what reaction you crave, they can control you with ease. A compliment becomes a leash. Silence becomes a weapon. This is how emotional independence is lost. The mind begins to orbit around external approval instead of internal values. True strength is the ability to sit in silence without needing to be seen. It is the ability to walk away without explaining. It is the ability to be disliked without changing oneself. Respect is built when a woman no longer negotiates her dignity for momentary validation. When she chooses depth over display, substance over show, character over clout. A mind that stops chasing attention begins to observe instead of perform. Observation brings awareness. Awareness brings control. Control brings peace. When approval is no longer needed, decisions become clearer. Relationships become healthier. Words become fewer but heavier. Presence becomes calm instead of desperate. Seeking attention is not confidence. It is insecurity wearing noise. Respect grows when insecurity is confronted, not covered. When the desire to be noticed is replaced with the discipline to be grounded, the mind stops leaking energy outward and begins to build strength inward, where no applause is needed, where no audience exists, where the self stands alone, stable, unshaken by praise or neglect, rooted in clarity rather than craving, moving through life without asking to be seen, yet impossible to ignore because of the weight carried in silence. Repeating the same mistakes while blaming fate is a clear sign of an untrained mind. Life gives lessons in cycles. The first time is a test. The second time is a reminder. The third time is a consequence. Intelligence recognizes the pattern early. Stupidity keeps walking the same road and then complains about the destination. When a woman refuses to reflect on her actions, she hands her power to chance and calls it destiny. Blaming fate feels comfortable because it removes responsibility. If everything is written, then nothing needs to change. This belief protects the ego but destroys growth. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" the mind asks, "Why does this always happen to me?" This question leads nowhere. It creates a victim identity. Once someone identifies as a victim, improvement feels impossible because the problem is always outside, never within. Mistakes are not the enemy. Repetition without awareness is. Pain is meant to sharpen perception. When pain arrives and no lesson is taken, it returns stronger. The same type of relationships fail. The same arguments repeat. The same outcomes appear with different faces. A mind that does not learn begins to believe it is cursed, unlucky, or misunderstood. In reality, it is simply unconscious. There is also pride hidden in this behavior. Admitting a mistake requires humility. Reflection requires silence. Correction requires discipline. Blaming fate requires none of these. It allows a person to remain exactly the same while expecting different results. This contradiction slowly weakens character. The mind becomes confused, tired, and resentful. Instead of adapting, it resists. Instead of growing, it complains. A woman who keeps repeating mistakes often ignores warning signs. She feels discomfort but suppresses it. She sees patterns but denies them. Intuition speaks but emotion overrules it. After the collapse, she claims surprise. This is not ignorance, it is avoidance. Awareness was present, but courage was missing. Facing the truth would require change, and change threatens comfort. Growth demands responsibility. Responsibility means accepting that choices create outcomes. Not every event is controllable, but every response is. When responsibility is avoided, the mind stays immature. It waits for rescue, it waits for luck. It waits for someone else to fix what it refuses to face. This waiting becomes a habit. Time passes. Opportunities fade. The same story repeats with increasing bitterness. Fate is often used as an excuse to avoid discipline. Discipline requires effort every day. Fate requires belief only. Belief without action becomes a prison. A woman who wants to grow must be willing to say, "This happened because I allowed it." This sentence is heavy, but it is powerful. It returns control to the self. Control brings clarity. Clarity allows change. Learning from mistakes does not mean self-hate. It means self-honesty. It means observing behavior without emotion. It means adjusting actions instead of justifying them. The mind that learns becomes flexible. The mind that blames becomes rigid. Rigidity breaks under pressure. Flexibility adapts and survives. Every repeated mistake is a message ignored. Every ignored message becomes louder. Life does not punish, it teaches. When lessons are refused, suffering increases. A woman who stops blaming fate begins to see patterns clearly. She recognizes her role in outcomes. She understands that growth is not about avoiding mistakes, but about refusing to repeat them unconsciously. Awareness turns pain into instruction. Responsibility turns chaos into order. When excuses disappear, progress begins. Confusing emotional reactions with strength is a deep misunderstanding of power. Emotion itself is not weakness, but being ruled by emotion is. When anger decides actions, clarity disappears. When sadness controls choices, direction is lost. A woman who reacts instantly to every feeling believes she is being real and expressive, but in truth, she is being predictable and unstable. Strength is not shown in how loudly one feels, but in how calmly one can respond. Emotional reactions feel powerful in the moment because they release pressure. Shouting, crying, blaming, and dramatizing give temporary relief, like opening a valve. But relief is not resolution. After the emotion passes, the problem remains, often larger than before. A mind that reacts first and thinks later keeps creating fires, and then mistakes the smoke for passion. True strength is restraint. It is the ability to pause when the body demands reaction. It is the discipline to breathe when the ego wants to explode. This restraint is difficult because it requires awareness in moments of pressure. Emotional reaction is easy. Control is hard. That is why control is rare and respected. When emotions dominate, logic becomes an enemy. Advice feels like an attack. Silence feels like rejection. Neutral events are interpreted as personal threats. This creates constant internal conflict. The mind becomes noisy, restless, and reactive. Relationships suffer because others never know which version will appear. Trust erodes when consistency disappears. A woman who confuses emotion with power often believes intensity equals authenticity. She believes that if she does not react, she is being fake or weak. This belief is false. Calm does not mean suppression. Calm means mastery. It means emotions are felt, understood, and then guided instead of unleashed. Mastery turns emotion into information rather than command. There is also manipulation hidden in emotional reactions, not always intentional, but effective. Tears, anger, and silence can become tools to control outcomes. When this works, the habit strengthens. Over time, emotional displays replace communication. Problems are no longer discussed, they are acted out. This prevents growth and deepens immaturity. Strength is measured by stability. A stable mind can face insult without collapsing. It can face disagreement without violence. It can face loss without self-destruction. This stability does not come from denying emotion, but from training the mind to observe it. Observation creates space. Space allows choice. Choice defines strength. A reactive woman often regrets her words but rarely her silence. Damage done by uncontrolled emotion is difficult to repair. Words spoken in heat cannot be retrieved. Actions taken in anger create consequences that last longer than the feeling that caused them. Over time, this pattern builds guilt, shame, and confusion. Emotional control is not coldness, it is clarity. It allows a woman to respond in a way that serves her long-term peace rather than short-term release. It allows her to walk away from provocation without losing dignity. It allows her to speak firmly without raising her voice. It allows her to disagree without destroying connection. Power is quiet. It does not need to prove itself through outbursts. It does not seek validation through drama. It sits rooted while chaos moves around it. A woman who understands this begins to choose patience over impulse, awareness over reaction, control over chaos. She realizes that emotion is energy, and energy without direction becomes destruction. Direction comes from discipline. Discipline transforms emotion into strength. Avoiding discipline and choosing comfort is the slow decay of potential. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, but in truth it is structure. Without structure, the mind scatters. When comfort becomes the priority, growth becomes optional. A woman who consistently chooses ease over effort slowly trains herself to avoid discomfort, and discomfort is where all transformation begins. Comfort feels safe because it demands nothing. It allows habits to repeat without challenge. Waking up late, delaying responsibilities, ignoring physical and mental health, and choosing short-term pleasure over long-term stability all feel harmless in the moment. But comfort compounds. Each small act of avoidance strengthens weakness. Each delayed action trains the mind to escape rather than confront. Discipline creates order in chaos. It tells the body when to move, the mind when to focus, and emotions when to wait. Without discipline, motivation is expected to do the work. Motivation is unstable. It comes and goes based on mood. Discipline remains even when desire disappears. A woman who relies on motivation waits for the right feeling. A disciplined woman acts regardless of feeling. Choosing comfort often disguises itself as self-care. True self-care builds strength. False self-care numbs resistance. Rest is necessary, but excess rest becomes stagnation. Pleasure is natural, but constant pleasure weakens resilience. When discipline is avoided, life becomes reactive. Problems are handled only when they become painful. By then, the cost is higher. A lack of discipline affects every area of life. The body becomes tired because it is not trained. The mind becomes anxious because it is not focused. Emotions become overwhelming because they are not regulated. Time feels scarce because it is not managed. This creates a constant sense of stress, even though effort is being avoided. Comfort promises peace, but delivers restlessness. Discipline is uncomfortable at first because it exposes resistance. Resistance is the ego protecting old habits. When a woman gives in to resistance, the ego grows stronger. When she acts despite resistance, the ego weakens. This is why discipline feels heavy in the beginning and light later. Comfort feels light in the beginning and heavy later. Avoiding discipline also damages self-trust. Each time a promise to oneself is broken, confidence erodes. The mind begins to believe its own excuses. Once self-trust is lost, dependence on others increases. Validation is sought externally because internal authority is missing. Discipline rebuilds self-trust through small, consistent actions that prove reliability to oneself. A disciplined woman does not live a rigid life. She lives a free one, Freedom is not the absence of rules, it is the result of them. A strong body gives freedom of movement. A trained mind gives freedom of thought. Emotional discipline gives freedom from regret. Comfort offers temporary relief but long-term limitation. The path of comfort avoids pain but multiplies it later. The path of discipline accepts small pain now to prevent greater pain later. This choice is made daily in small moments that seem insignificant. Whether to wake up when the alarm rings, whether to speak the truth or stay silent, whether to act or delay, these moments shape character. When discipline is rejected, potential remains unused. Talent without discipline fades. Intelligence without discipline becomes scattered. Beauty without discipline becomes fragile. A woman who understands discipline stops waiting for circumstances to change. She changes her habits. She builds structure where chaos existed. She chooses effort when comfort is available. Through this choice, strength is built quietly, daily, without applause, without drama, shaping a life that is stable, grounded, and internally controlled. Ready, says Keynote No. 5 when you want it expanded in the same style and rules. Blaming others instead of taking responsibility is a habit that weakens the mind and delays maturity. Responsibility is heavy, and the ego resists weight. When something goes wrong, the easiest escape is to point outward. Parents were wrong, society was unfair, friends betrayed, partners failed, circumstances were bad. Each excuse protects self-image but steals power. The moment blame leaves the self, control leaves with it. A woman who avoids responsibility lives in reaction mode. Life happens to her instead of being shaped by her. She waits for apologies, changes, and justice from others while remaining unchanged herself. This waiting creates bitterness. Bitterness turns into resentment. Resentment clouds judgment. The mind becomes focused on proving innocence rather than improving behavior. Taking responsibility does not mean accepting fault for everything. It means recognizing one's role in outcomes. Even when others are wrong, the response chosen still belongs to the self. Blame removes this ownership. It says, I could not have acted differently. This belief is dangerous because it freezes growth. If there was no choice, there is nothing to learn. Blame also feeds the ego. The ego survives by staying superior. Admitting mistakes feels like weakness, so the ego deflects. It creates stories that justify behavior. These stories feel convincing because they are repeated often. Over time, the mind begins to believe its own excuses. Awareness dulls. Patterns repeat. A woman trapped in blame often feels misunderstood. She believes people never see her effort or intentions. She focuses on how hard she tried rather than what actually happened. Intention becomes more important than impact. This disconnect damages relationships. Others feel unheard while she feels attacked. Conflict becomes constant because responsibility is never shared. Blame creates emotional immaturity. When nothing is ever one's fault, self-correction feels unnecessary. Advice feels insulting. Feedback feels hostile. Growth requires humility, and humility cannot exist where blame dominates. The mind becomes defensive, always preparing explanations instead of solutions. Responsibility brings clarity. The moment a woman says, I allowed this, power returns. This sentence is uncomfortable because it removes excuses, but it is also liberating. It turns suffering into instruction. It transforms pain into data. Instead of asking why life is unfair, the mind asks what must change. Avoiding responsibility often comes from fear. Fear of guilt, fear of shame, fear of being wrong. But guilt ignored becomes heavier than guilt faced. Shame hidden grows deeper than shame acknowledged. Responsibility shortens suffering. Blame prolongs it. A responsible mind is proactive. It does not wait for permission to improve. It observes patterns and adjusts behavior. It accepts that mistakes are part of learning, not proof of worthlessness. This acceptance creates emotional stability. Stability builds confidence that does not depend on others agreeing or approving. When blame disappears, communication improves. Conversations shift from accusation to understanding. The need to win arguments fades. The need to solve problems grows. Relationships become calmer because responsibility removes the need for defense. Blame is addictive because it feels relieving in the moment. Responsibility feels heavy at first, but it builds strength over time. A woman who practices responsibility develops self-respect. Self-respect creates boundaries. Boundaries reduce chaos. Chaos fades when accountability becomes a habit. The mind that accepts responsibility stops feeling helpless. It stops waiting for others to change. It acts where it has control and releases what it does not. This balance creates inner authority. Authority removes the need to explain, justify, or prove. Growth becomes quiet, steady, internal. Blaming others keeps the past alive. Responsibility builds the future. The difference between stagnation and progress is not intelligence, luck, or opportunity. It is the willingness to look inward without defense, to admit error without collapse, to choose correction over comfort, and to carry the weight of one's choices with awareness rather than excuses. Refusing to learn and grow is the final collapse of the mind. Learning is not limited to books, classrooms, or formal education. Learning is the ability to observe, adapt, and refine oneself through experience. A woman who believes she already knows enough closes the door to wisdom. Confidence without curiosity becomes arrogance. Once arrogance settles in, growth stops quietly. A closed mind fears being wrong. Being wrong threatens identity, so instead of questioning beliefs, the mind defends them. New ideas are dismissed, different perspectives are mocked, advice is ignored. This resistance feels like strength but is actually fragility. A strong mind bends, tests, and updates itself. A weak mind hardens and breaks under pressure. Life constantly changes. People evolve. Circumstances shift. A woman who refuses to learn becomes outdated in her thinking. What once worked no longer works. What once protected now limits. Without learning, adaptation disappears. Without adaptation, suffering increases. The world moves forward while the mind remains stuck, repeating old strategies in new situations. Refusing to learn often comes from ego. The ego wants to be right more than it wants peace. It prefers familiarity over truth. This creates stagnation. Stagnation looks calm on the surface but is decay underneath. The body ages naturally. The mind must be trained to stay flexible. Without training, mental sharpness dulls. Emotional intelligence weakens. Decision-making suffers. A woman who stops learning begins to blame the world for her discomfort. She says people have changed, values have declined, opportunities are gone. In reality, her methods have expired. Instead of updating herself, she demands the world adjust. This expectation creates frustration and isolation. Learning requires humility. It requires admitting gaps in knowledge. It requires listening more than speaking. Many avoid learning because silence feels like inferiority. They speak to appear strong. They interrupt to feel relevant. They argue to protect ego. These behaviors block understanding. Growth only enters a quiet mind. Growth is uncomfortable because it exposes weakness. It challenges habits. It forces reflection. Comfort resists this process. A woman who refuses growth chooses familiarity over improvement. She stays in known pain rather than unknown possibility. Over time, this choice limits potential. A learning mind does not mean agreeing with everything. It means considering before rejecting. It means testing ideas instead of dismissing them. It means observing results rather than clinging to beliefs. This approach creates wisdom. Wisdom is not accumulation of facts but refinement of judgment. Refusing to learn also affects relationships. Communication becomes rigid. Conflict becomes repetitive. Apologies become rare. The same arguments resurface because nothing changes internally. Growth resolves patterns. Stagnation repeats them. A woman who commits to learning remains adaptable. She asks questions without shame. She observes outcomes without denial. She adjusts behavior without self-attack. This creates inner stability. Stability reduces fear. Reduced fear opens curiosity. Curiosity fuels continuous growth. Learning keeps the mind young. It sharpens awareness. It deepens patience. It expands perspective. A woman who continues to grow does not fear time. She evolves with it. She replaces outdated beliefs with clearer understanding. She refines herself without needing approval. The refusal to learn is the refusal to live fully. Life teaches daily through success and failure, pleasure and pain. Ignoring these lessons creates repetition. Acceptance transforms experience into wisdom. A woman who embraces learning does not cling to identity, she improves it. She does not defend her flaws, she corrects them. Growth becomes a lifelong discipline, not a temporary phase, shaping a mind that remains open, grounded, and capable of change in every season of life. In the end, all six signs point toward one simple truth. The mind either grows or declines based on awareness and discipline. Seeking attention, repeating mistakes, reacting emotionally, avoiding discipline, blaming others, and refusing to learn are not separate flaws. They are different expressions of the same inner pattern, lack of self-mastery. A life driven by these patterns becomes unstable not because of the world, but because of the absence of reflection. Every choice either builds strength or weakens it. Every reaction either creates clarity or confusion. Every excuse either protects comfort or destroys progress. Real intelligence is not about appearing perfect or superior. It is about correction. It is the willingness to observe the self without denial and adjust without ego. Growth begins the moment responsibility is accepted, emotions are understood, discipline is practiced, and learning becomes continuous. Nothing changes outwardly until something changes inwardly. The shift from reaction to awareness, from blame to responsibility, from comfort to discipline, and from pride to learning is what separates stagnation from evolution. The mind that chooses growth becomes steady, clear, and controlled, not because life becomes easier, but because the person becomes stronger than their own impulses.